Hello, everyone, and welcome. You're listening to the Stake and Rewards podcast, where we provide actionable insights from thought leaders of the staking industry to analysts and professionals. Today, we're thrilled to have Illia Polosukhin with us, co-founder of Near Protocol. Illia has an extensive background in machine learning and engineering and is a well-respected figure in the tech industry, having worked 3 years at Google on natural language processing and question answering capabilities before starting to work on Near in 2017. In this episode, we'll take a deeper look into Near staking, its role in the ecosystem, reward rates and where they come from, how and where to stake Near, validators and their role in securing and developing the ecosystem, as well as future developments around staking. So without further ado, let's dive right in. Welcome, Illia. It's great to have you on the show.
Thank you for inviting me, Marian.
So can you briefly explain to our audience again what Near Protocol is?
So at the core, Near Protocol is trying to solve how do we bring Web3 to the mainstream adoption, right? And kind of the thesis is that there's three pillars that needs to be solved, right? One is that it needs to be easy to use. So it should be simple for normal users to use. It also should be simple for developers to build on. The second one, it needs to be secure, right? So it needs to provide kind of as much security as possible while being simple to use. And finally, it needs to be scalable. It needs to be able to handle ever growing user base. And that's actually where things get interesting because, as you can imagine, as more and more adoption happening, more and more network effects, you actually need to be able to scale the kind of the block size, the number of transactions, the amount of state that the blockchain can handle. And so we do kind of work across these three pillars. On the simple to use, we have built a very different account model. We call it flexible account model that has kind of a lot of the concept that people now talk about account abstraction. We've built that and kind of been running with that. We have accounts are actually named. So my account is illia.near. They have different keys have different permissions. You can hide the keys from the user and kind of think more of them conceptually as devices for recovery, like other multi-sig holders. We are using WebAssembly, which allows kind of a wide variety of programming languages to be used to be built on Near. It also means that you can actually build some very complex applications and take existing code. And so one of the really interesting applications on Near is actually Aurora, which is an EVM, so the Ethereum virtual machine that got compiled and run as a smart contract on Near. You can run other blockchains as smart contract on Near. That kind of showcases the power and simplicity to development on Near.
Yeah, I think from the way it looks to me, it's like that Near Protocol has done the most emphasis or put the most emphasis on user experience, especially for normal users. And I would say this is the biggest differentiator that I see with Near pushing into the market. And since its mainnet launch in late 2020, the Near ecosystem has become one of the top layer 1 blockchains in Web3. Near currently ranks place 11 for staking market cap, according to Stake and Rewards. That's with a whopping $1.1 billion in stake market cap. So what role does staking play in the overall Near ecosystem?
So staking, is a corner role to pretty much provide the economic security of the network, right? And so it is a proof of stake network, and all the nodes in the network need to have stake, either their own or delegated. And through that, pretty much kind of that creates the economic security. And the interesting thing about Near, right, is that because we are sharded network, as more capacity is needed, right, as more kind of users are using the network, the idea that you can continue expanding number of shards. When you expand number of shards, you actually need more validators, more computers, like independent computers that are participating in the consensus. And so there's a very natural kind of scale to, number of participants in validation that's happening and kind of amount of stake that needs to be attracted for that to work. And so the kind of it's a core role is as well for scalability, because the validators are the ones who kind of adding extra compute capacity to the network.
So the whole question about how large the validator set should be for the protocol doesn't even ask itself for Near, because with each new shard, the set of validators expands naturally.
Correct.
I've seen this discussion also with some the persons we met at our staking summit, that actually a lot of the validators right now for different blockchains, they're not running profitable. And the reason for that is the too large set size of validators. And we've seen some of the security layers scaling back on validator set size. So this is very interesting to see that it's already built in near to have this normal type of growth that comes
Exactly. Adaptability, like you need to pay for what you use, right? You cannot like overpay. And so this is naturally like as more users come, that means more near is being burned for the usage. That means there's more for rewards as well.
Mm-hmm. And you already alluded now to the burn mechanism. So I've seen in one of your older talks, I think it was 3 years ago, uploaded 3 years ago on YouTube, where you one of your whiteboard series where you state that basically to have token issuance as the source for staking rewards is not that big of a problem, because you punish through inflation. You only punish those that want to use or that hold the token for speculative purposes. All others would put their assets to work either way. And so let's take that one as a question, but it also ties into that you are burning your additional transaction fees, which increases the amount of reward rates that stakers and delegators, but also the validators, of course, get even above those 5%. So why did you chose this type of burn mechanism and source for your rewards?
Sure. Yeah. So I think there's kind of few parts here, right? So I think the first question is generally interesting, which is when you're receiving a reward, and this is actually comes from inflation, is that even you're receiving a reward or you're just punishing everyone who's not staking, right? And there's an interesting now is like liquid staking, for example, concept. You actually can participate in DeFi without holding your underlying asset, still while staking the underlying asset. And so I think like we still don't see that 100% like everybody's just in the liquid staking assets, because there's obviously like extra risks that come with that. But like I do think that's an interesting discussion. And actually originally when we were designing, we did consider doing the demerge mode, where instead of inflating, the validators and stakers would stay the same and everybody else would shrink. That has a lot of unintended consequences, but from economics perspective, it's actually exactly the same, right? Because like everybody has exactly the same percentage of the total supply over time. Now, a burn mechanism in general, the kind of economics. So Near has two specific mechanisms for Near to kind of be in a way consumed for usage, and then that indirectly pays for the validators, right? So one is transaction fees. So when you send a transaction, the 70% gets burned, 30% actually gets allocated to the contracts that were used in this call. And so that's used for like developer incentives or whatever other mechanisms that developers want to build around. So the idea there is that we wanted to guarantee the rewards for the validators, but there's no point of paying them more from transaction fees. And so the way it works, pretty much, we burn everything that comes in transactions, and we mint a very specific amount for validators, because the incremental cost that they do for transactions is very minimal, and they are rewarded already through like every epoch through the validator rewards. And so this actually balances out from the way this is built. The other part is actually, which usually people don't look at, is Near is also needed for storing data on the protocol. And so when you are like, let's say if you want to store 100 kilobytes of data, let's say smart contract or list of addresses and how much they have of the token, the one Near needs to be stored on that contract. And so if you do release data, like you've deleted, you can get this Near back. That's kind of storage staking. But again, economically, this means while this data is stored, that Near is sitting there, it's not being staked. And because it's not being staked, the percentage of inflation that it's not being staked is allocated to all the validators. And so again, economically, this is how the storage is paid for, because this kind of like opportunity cost of not staking this near is then distributed among validators to store this data. And so that kind of creates like this two parts of the economics, right? Transaction fees are being burned and this storage staking locking a bunch of near for storage. And then kind of the inflation in a way is incentivizing validators for running the. And so those three things then balance out each other. And again, like at some point, yes, the transaction fees can actually burn in more near than validators are allocated. And it's actually fine because again, validators are paid for the work they're doing in kind of appropriate amount.
Hmm. During the design phase for Near, you had the whiteboard series where you would interview other developer teams of other blockchain ecosystems. What were the inspirations for this type of, the whole setup around staking rewards? Because to me, it sounds very unique. I guess there's no other blockchain out there that has a similar design.
Yeah, I mean, so we talked with everyone, right? And like I'll definitely appreciate the input that Zaki from Cosmos, I mean Vitalik obviously, and a lot of other folks have given, and kind of understanding how they think about it. I think for us, it's always been like understand what people are doing, but then also challenge that kind of why is it done this way, and because a lot of designs are there because of some historic reasons, not because they were built bottom up. I think, I mean, definitely a lot of inspiration from Vitalik actually had a paper back in 18 or maybe where they were analyzing different economics of storage. So they had rent and kind of a few other parameters. And so we've played around with some of that and then ended up doing something else because like we actually implemented rent and saw how hard to use it would be. Because like when your balance of an account starts to decrease because of the rent, everybody's freaking out. But generally, like that was obviously a lot of kind of good thinking through that came from the research community that we've participated and kind of reworked for what we believe is the right approach to do here.
Mm-hmm. And for our audience, the current reward rate for stakers, as can be seen on stakingrewards.com, is about 9.5% in return per year. And other data points which I pulled from the Staking Rewards API, which are interesting, is that the staking ratio of Near has steadily increased over the past 12 months and is now sitting at about 43.8% of all tokens being staked. So you can see a nice adoption curve there. Also, the user growth in staking has been significant. The unique staking wallets have also steadily increased and are currently sitting at about 95,000 unique staking wallets. If you want to check out the data, go to stakingrewards.com. And if you are interested in the API that is also giving you additional data, please reach out to our sales team. Can you speak to the current state of staking on the Near network and how it has evolved since the protocol launch?
For sure, yeah. So I think maybe a good background is how we launched the network in general. So the way the network kind of was bootstrapped is through an incentivized testnet, which is but the way it was done is we've taken kind of the participants who have showcased that they were able to run Near network from the incentivized testnet, and we kind of booted up them to be the validators of mainnet while disabled all of the transfers for the token except delegation. And so, and then kind of the token was distributed to initial group. And so this group needed to delegate to the validators. And then together with validators, they needed to decide to vote and to enable transfers. In a way, they decided to launch the network. And so that was like a pretty big role that validators actually played. They were pretty much deciding when to launch the network and if the network is ready for that, because they actually had the feel on the metal if everything's working. And then last year, 2022, we had the launch of what we call chunk only producers. So this is kind of in the spirit I was saying, the more shards we have, the more validators we have. So we call them chunk only producers because they produce a chunk of the block. And so that was, again, launched last year in September, with now allowing to have a lot more validators kind of proportional to the number of shards. So like from our perspective, validators play, a governance role. Kind of a lot of it is more of backstop governance, like, right, is, if there's any kind of large decisions that nobody else can make, like, for example, launching the network, obviously they need to work with their delegators kind of and represent that user base. Then they play the role around, running the node, all of the kind of details there. Security is a big thing. So if there's any security concerns, right, the validators is one who are kind of actively reacting to that and making sure that everything's secure. And finally, pretty much working with us to test, with the protocol team to test everything as we're launching new releases. And we actually had 40 something upgrades since mainnet. Like, the idea is to have kind of continuously evolving protocol that is able to adapt to the needs of users. And so because of that, it's extremely important to have kind of validators testing and participating, not just like at mainnet, but also during the life cycle of the testing of the protocol upgrades.
Which items on your roadmap would you say will have the biggest impact on stakers in terms of staking opportunities and impact on reward rates, stakers, validators?
So there's a chunk of work where the team wants to run 100 shards, and this may get like, we may not run it this year directly, but that is the goal, just to get like the network to provide the scale, right? And that this is probably not needed for mainnet, right? There's no demand for that, but that's a really interesting kind of activity to participate. But obviously, the kind of governance right now can decide to increase number of shards over time. And that is that changes the parameters of how many validators are on the network, which, more validators means either more stake or lower like stake requirement, but there needs to be more machines either way, right? To run more shards. And so that probably is the biggest. There's a lot of discussion around like storage staking. How can we improve the design there? I don't think it changes that much for validators, but it is a kind of economic parameter, right? That kind of protocol team and community is trying to figure out how to improve.
Is there a bottleneck there right now around storage staking?
It's not a bottleneck. It's more of, I would say, it got a little bit expensive for some use cases. And so given we're trying to make it, simple and straightforward to use. And then there's a little bit of kind of conceptually like programming for it is a little bit more complex than we want. And like, how do we simplify that? So maybe we'll keep that, but then add another approach of paying through a gas fee as well. So there's like few discussions happening on that. And so, it's good to keep that in track for validators and as these things evolve. And finally, the kind of the final stage where the network becomes automatically adjustable to number of shards based on demand, right? So we call it dynamic sharding. And so that's where kind of the more usage comes to networks, the more shards will be needed. And so it automatically like expands the capacity and kind of attracts more validators into the network. As the ecosystem grows, that's where there will be interesting things happening around like how all of this will be balanced out.
In terms of staking rewards, it's like two major dynamics there. As usage goes up, staking rewards will increase. And as the staking ratio increases, it's like a negative effect. Staking rewards will decrease. What I was thinking, staking was an absolute no-brainer when we had low interest rates for not even comparable investments. There was just no yield to be found anywhere in the market. But now we are gradually returning back to a higher interest rate environment. And I'm asking myself the question, in the end, staking is just paying for the infrastructure of blockchain. But the blockchain itself needs to make enough revenue to pay out higher reward rates than treasury bills, for example, for US government. Do you see that this could be a problem in the future, or would you say there will be enough revenue potential to have staking reward rates always above, let's say, 6% per year?
Well, I think it's not very correct to compare a percent in the token compared to percent in dollars, right? Just because we're talking about volatile assets that have their own supply demand uh, mechanics, right? So like if we start talking about like a macro economy of one of these layer ones, right? There's other things that are in effect, right? And that's where it's hard to start. It's hard to just isolate and say, hey, transaction fees are revenue, because they're not. And like different networks actually do it differently, right? Some of them are actually, they're not revenue because you give them to validators. And so it's not captured by anyone. So in our case, we're burning it. So you can consider it kind of revenue. But for example, storage staking, being staked is also revenue. But also, when we talk about, near that's been locked in Uniswap, like, or other AMMs or DEXs or other exchanges, right? Well, that's also sinks for the token, which means that token is not able to participate in staking. And so at the same time, like a lot of people who are validating staking, they kind of taking the long position on the token anyway, right? It's not that they like compare this with buying a T-bill and holding it. So I do think, and by the way, you can, take a liquid staking token, borrow against it dollars, buy a T-bill and get both, right? So like, I think the complexity of this is way beyond this.
Can you discuss the process for becoming a validator on the Near network and what qualifications are needed?
So, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. If you go to near dash nodes .io, this is where there's all of the instructions. You need a pretty normal computer to run it. So it's like a 8-core CPU with 16 to 24 gigs of RAM. Importantly, you need an SSD, so like 500 to a terabyte SSD, and then with that you can run a validator node. And it depends on how you set up all this. You set your settings, like monitoring all the stuff on top of that, and there's some tutorials and instructions how to do these things. And then to become an active validator, right now you need 20,000 near as like a threshold, and you can gain that with delegations. And so one of the unique thing also for Near is that all of the validators actually run through a smart contract delegation. So delegation is implemented through smart contracts, and validators are able, if they want to, run different smart contracts, which have different logic, including they can have their own liquid staking, or they can have, tax optimization routine that doesn't return, like that holds tokens for a year, for example, for long-term gains and stuff like this. And so you deploy that contract, you gain your delegation, and then you become an active validator after 20,000 near threshold.
And let's say, in addition to the normal staking rewards that are being paid out to validators, of course, how does Near incentivize the validators to provide high quality services and maintain the security, or let's push it a little bit further, to maintain best practices? How can we envision this coordination is working?
So there are a few sides. I think one is incentivized testnets that we've been running that has been like a lot of challenges has been around kind of setting up the monitoring and setting up some of the like what we think is best practices. And we actually, so one of the things we kind of as an ecosystem trying to do is decentralize more. And so last StakeWars were not actually run by Pagoda, the kind of company that is the main contributor to the protocol, but instead it was run by liquid staking providers. And so liquid staking providers now are becoming the driver of best practices and kind of like finding good quality and incentivizing it by delegating to it. So for those maybe not familiar, liquid staking providers, where you put your near, and then they delegate to different validators, and you get in turn a liquid staking token that you can do something in DeFi. And so because of this, they actually are the ones who are monitoring all of these validators, because they are delegating to them. And if validators are kind of have the not right setup or have the offline time, they're losing the rewards. And so we actually push, in a way, like through the economy, push the responsibility for figuring out how this should work to liquid staking providers. And they've run the past StakeWars, our incentivized testnet. They were writing challenges, they were kind of scoring folks, and now they're actually rolling out delegations to those folks to bring them on board on mainnet. And so I would say, yeah, like a lot of it is actually how do we figure out how the ecosystem itself can start monitoring and enforcing it? Because there's a lot of, I would say, like people just stake and don't look much. And so we want these active participants who are kind of active members of community who are doing this because they also have economic incentive to do that.
Mhm. So the envisioned role of the validator in the future is much more moving to a really active participant in governance, best practices in staking here.
Well, I wouldn't say like I call it a governance backstop because we are like Near ecosystem is trying to build a governance framework that is independent, although validators can obviously participate and should participate. But I think validator governance is mostly on the technical side, right? It's like really when, like rolling out a tier one network that, interconnects nodes for a faster performance. That's like a validator question, right? Maybe adjusting parameters or something, or like launching meta transactions, that's more application level. So we're trying to create work groups for each topic. So there's a protocol work group, there's validator work group, there's like contract work group, standards, and all those things, which are designed to work in that kind of for that specific topic. And they have representative of projects and protocol developers and validators for validator group. And then they can surface and decide on problems within their subspace. And then that all kind of, we call it developer governance. We try to build an umbrella around that. So we're trying to make governance kind of more specialized in a way because like, trying to get somebody to decide on everything is, it's hard. And like people don't have context on most of the things, but then the things that, they care about and they have the context, that's where we're trying to engage as many people as possible.
Perfect. So, all right, closing it off here. What's the best way to follow you and Near Protocol, Ilya?
Well, Near Protocol is at Near Protocol on Twitter. Me is at IlBlackDragon, or just type in Illia. Yeah, it's here. And so near.org is, yeah, you can start a journey through this. And for the ones who want to run nodes, near-nodes.io.
Perfect. Thank you, Ilya, for being so generous with your time. We have been speaking with Illia Polosukhin, the co-founder of Near Protocol. If you enjoyed this conversation, subscribe to our YouTube channel for more episodes from the forefront of staking. Follow me on Twitter, that's at Marian_Walter_ and our team at Staking Rewards. You've been listening to the Staking Rewards podcast. For Ilya and the audience, thanks for tuning in.
Thank you.